So my name is Rosie. I'm the events coordinator here at Readers Books, and I want to thank everyone for coming out and being so flexible about wearing masks and showing your cards. It's a brave new and weird and scary world. This is, I think, our fourth or fifth in-person event since 2020, so it's really nice to see everybody and see everybody out and about. I think that one of the things everyone tells me they've been looking forward to the most is travel. And I'm a homebody. I almost never travel anywhere. But I want to now. And it's books like this that remind me why it's so cool to have travel adventures that have an extra purpose to them. So it's one thing just to go anywhere, but it's another thing to go, I'm here. Maybe there's something that can enrich my life even more that I can visit and that I can see. What Mary Lea Carroll did with her two books, Somehow Saints and Saints Everywhere, is go places but have that inner purpose as well. What she did was she went on her travels, and if there was a shrine to a female saint, she would visit it and she would learn more about that shrine and that person. And I think that's just a really nice way to do things. You balance off your travels and your enjoyment with a sense of purpose and finding an adventure there. So Mary Lee's going to come up here. She's going to tell you all about it. So if you could give her a really big round of applause, she'll come on up and chat with you about her books.
Well, it's true what she said about traveling. I did travel with that purpose and realized people travel for all different reasons, some for food and some for art and some to get away from their families and some to just discover themselves. And I came upon this very much by the back door. So my name is Mary Lea Carroll, and I wrote my first book. It came out when I was, I wrote it when I was 65, so it came out when I was 67. And it was very unexpectedly popular. People magazine picked it up, and I thought I was like a one and done person. And then the publisher said, well, what are you writing next? Like 2 weeks after this came out. And I was so sort of like astonished at that I had been able to do it, that I didn't even have an answer for her. I said, I just said, I loved doing this. It changed my life. I know how to do it now. And if I could pick anything, I would just keep going, keep having adventures. And it was funny because in a certain sense, this book took like 14 years to write. And so when she and I were having this conversation, she said, well, why don't you just do another book, and can you have it ready by Christmas? And I thought, well, if the first one took 14 years, I don't think it's going to happen by Christmas. But guess what? It did. And so, I will say that what happened with this whole thing is that I've always indeed loved traveling and storytelling, and I've enjoyed an extroverted personality. After my children grew up and left, and my husband retired, and I was hitting my 60s, I had a certain dread about the future. And maybe some of you, based on all of our hair colors, might understand what I mean, in that as you get into your 60s and 70s, and if we're lucky we get to live till in our 90s, and I thought, what am I going to do with myself? I really was searching quite a lot for my purpose, and I didn't know what else to do but sort of in the mornings like sit in a chair with a cup of coffee and ponder this. And I would ask God, I said, what do you want me to do, God? I mean, I've got good health, I've got, abilities, and I just did not know where to turn, because it felt like at a certain point in your life, things start to close rather than open. And I did this for like 2 years. It was pathetic. And I didn't have any clear direction at all, except for this little voice that said, well, why don't you clean up your office? And I thought, well, that didn't seem like a very, but I thought, why don't I clean up my office? Maybe something will come to light there. My office was sort of like my boneyard for all the creative projects I had almost finished, for many decades. And I started going through all my travel journals that I'd always kept, and I was a tour guide in my 20s and 30s and traveled the world there, and we had wonderful family trips here and there, and I always kept journals. And I thought, well, before I toss all of them, why don't I just give them one last interesting glance to, And what I actually realized in these travel journals is that wherever I did travel, because I guess I was interested, I would, if we were in Paris or if we were in, Spain or Italy, I would end up seeking out the shrines to saints and the miraculous sites. They just always really interested me. And I just had these brief notes. It was right when the book Lean In came out in 2016. And and that book came out, and the whole idea of that book made me so tired. I just thought, oh my gosh, now we also have to do that on top of like everything else that we're already doing. And it made me think, I thought, well, wait a minute, like the women who really leaned in were these saints, these female saints from every era, from the year 100, from the year 1200, from the year, 2016. They leaned in and broke glass ceilings and bent reality in certain ways, and their works live on to our benefit, century after century. So I started thinking about that and pondering it, and then I started reading about some of the saints of the places I had already visited, and the more I read, it's like the more tired I got of these particular saints, because I realized much of what was ever written about them was extremely dated or mild or pious in content that didn't seem to at all create the energy I thought they must have had to do what they did. So I started to really think about them. I said, well, what about trying to reimagine who these, in the first book it's women, in the second book it's everybody, who these people actually really were. And they must have had fantastic personalities, because people wouldn't have done all the things they asked them to do if they didn't. And that doesn't come through in the literature. So much doesn't come through in the literature. And because I'm a failed comedy writer, I thought, well, maybe I could even make them funny. And because that would be entertaining. And who doesn't want to be entertained? And so that was sort of the thing, how I started to approach all this. And this so almost didn't ever happen, because once you begin to delve into the lives of the saints, you realize it's basically an endless topic. Endless. There are thousands of saints, and when I felt confident enough to talk to anybody about it, they would say, well, you better put this saint in, or is this saint in it, or is that saint in it? And I'd get so anxious. I thought, oh my God, I don't have 100 years to make this happen. And so with the first book, you have a lot of learning to do on controlling your topic and controlling what your idea is, and discovering fully what your idea is. And with this book, honestly, this fellow I was talking to, he must have been an angel or something, because I don't know his name at all, but we ended up talking about writing and so forth. And I gave him my problem with this book. I said, I feel like I'm in quicksand. I don't know how to control such a divinely eternal topic like this. And he simply said, well, maybe you're already done. Maybe you're done and you don't know it. When I got this piece of advice, I thought, well, maybe I am. Maybe the book doesn't have to be this big. Maybe it could just be this big. And maybe it can be just the 6 saints that's in here. And leave your audience wanting more, so to speak. And that was the best piece of advice I got for this book, because then I realized, okay, this is what it's going to be. Now I can go back and begin to polish it. Now I know what the width and length and heft of it is. So that's why I say this one is six women in 6 cities across 6 centuries. There's a lot of Mary in here too. And so that's how it came about. And I only wrote about saints who I had found in my travel journals. So there's no rhyme or reason to them except that I personally went there. And with many of them, the only thing I may have known about them was their name. I didn't know anything else. And I thought, good, because I'm an average person. Let me make of it what I can for today's person. People who are at the shrine as well, and I try to, are they like me? Do they believe more? And, are they super holy or not holy? Or just all the questions you might have when you're dealing with this kind of a topic. We wanted to make them very friendly and very much like something that would be giftable or that you would want on your bedstand and you can dip into it and so forth. But the illustrator in both books is Joe Rohde, who was in charge of Disney Imagineering for many, many years. He'd invent all the imaginary lands that they have in the Bahamas and Florida and Hawaii and so forth. And he got behind the project and made very whimsical drawings throughout, which make it a friendly book. And that's how it came about. And it's been a wonderful success. So then along came Somehow Saints, and this is a mural that the cover art is a mural that was found down in Puebla, Mexico, and the book designer decided to go with this. So in keeping with the same theme, this is a mural also that was found in the Sudan. And almost nobody knows who this saint is. And somebody even said, was it a World War I prisoner of war? And I said, oh, no. But the mural was found on a refugee center in the Sudan. And this is Saint Bakita. That her fame is actually spreading all around the world. She's the patron saint of human trafficking, if you can imagine. But again, now in this book, it was a different method because I had used all of my material for this one, so I didn't have any new saints up my sleeves at all. And I thought, well, I'm going to embark on a new set of travels. But since I had to have it done by Christmas, I thought they better be closer at hand than all over. And so a lot of, I embarked on a train trip, and I started in Washington, D.C., and I went up the eastern seacoast and up into Quebec, and then back down into New York City, and I was able to, surprisingly, the North America is full of saints, which I was just not aware of. And I changed it up because this book changed me a lot, and like my eyes opened to like how many wonderful people are all around us, and how much goodness there really is. But oftentimes we're not actually, our eyes aren't open to it. And so with this one, I almost call them like sorbet chapters between the ones of the saints, of very average people, either they're friends of mine or I have some interaction with them that impresses me. And I thought, oh, see, this is a person who is awesome. Nobody knows who they are. They just have this quality, and I just wanted to celebrate that a little bit. And also, all my life, people have said, well, tell us a story about when you were a kid. Tell us a story about when you were a kid. Because I came from a very big family, and it was full of characters, and we were full of, mischief when we were growing up. And so also as a yin to the yang of the saints, there is the stories about my large Catholic family and my movie star grandmother who lived with us, and my mother who never signed up for the role of mother of 9 kids, and what that was like. So those are, it's these books end up in the travel section, in the memoir section, in the inspiration section, and they are very well liked for whatever one's faith tradition is, because they're just really about life. So that's a short and a long of these books. And if you like, I'd be happy to give you a short excerpt from each of them so you can get how it's like. Okay. So with this one, we may as well start at the beginning. And it starts in Italy. And back in 2000, my father-in-law called us, my husband Bill and I, and invited us to go with him on his veterans trip to Italy, because he had been a soldier there in World War II. And we were going to go town to town and revisit all the places that they had liberated during the war. So that was cool. And we departed because from that trip, and everybody, before we went to Italy, everybody said, oh, be sure to go to Siena. Be sure to go to Siena. And the only thing I knew about Siena is that there had been St. Catherine of Siena, but that was all I knew. So that sort of is how we got going. So if you give me just 1 second. Okay, so here's just a little excerpt. Our hotel room, upstairs and in the back of a 14th century palace, offered a spectacular view from the tiniest window over the bathtub. From there, we could see endless yellow fields and far-off stone towers. With a hum of pleasure, I realized there was no way to tell what century it was. Let's go see the saint's remains, I proposed to Bill and Glennie, our 11-year-old, who we'd taken with us. Bill was stretched out on the fluffy bed, resting after driving us here. He gave a little groan, mumbling, "Saint's remains. Honey, we're on vacation." Undaunted, I opened the Fedor's guidebook. I summarized. Parts of St. Catherine are on display in the 12th century Basilica of San Domenico's, a main tourist attraction. Parts, Bill seemed to say to himself. It started raining as we headed out and hurried across the slippery cobblestones, one of those summer storms with violent thunder and a crazy 5-minute downpour. San Domenico is a medieval construction of brick and stone, fearfully plain and austere. We scuttled in out of the wet. So dark and expansive was the inside that we all suddenly felt lost. I placed a hand on a pillar to steady myself and proceeded to tilt my head back as far as I could. I could barely see the gloomy upper recesses. A group of people knelt before a small side altar that flickered with votive candles. Nudging my way in and around like I do for the Rose Parade on New Year's Day back home in Pasadena, I saw an ancient crystal case holding a frayed velvet cushion. A silver filigree holder sat on the red cushion, and in the holder was St. Catherine's thumb. It looked like a stub of charcoal sporting a fingernail. It was 620 years old. They said her head was here too somewhere, but it turned out it was on long-term loan to Rome. In fact, for 300 years already. I love this kind of thing. It is all just so strange and kind of fun, and yet so very mysterious. I wanted to know why, for hundreds and hundreds of years, people have revered Catherine. Why are parish churches all over the world named after her? I knelt down and thought, who are you? And hello, why hasn't your thumb turned to dust? Yeah. Well, I bought the little booklet to find out. And for the next 3 nights, I stayed up late reading. There's something so great about sitting up in a cozy hotel bed, not sleepy at all, reading while everyone around you sleeps. It's so freeing, like you have all the time in the world. Okay, so that's just a little excerpt from the very, very beginning of my travels. And I start out a little bit ironic, you know, and a little bit eye-rolling, like, oh, we Catholics have so many strange things that we do. But you can't spend this amount of time with these people without them really touching you and without them changing you. So the tone kind of gets a little deeper as I get deeper into it. And this book takes you to Prague, and it takes you to Salamanca, and it takes you to Mexico City, and it takes you other places. So it's good armchair traveling. That's what happens. There's a saying in the Catholic Church called incorruptibles. Incorruptible. And I mean, just last fall, I haven't written about this, but it was quite astonishing. We were my husband and I were in Padua, and there, of course, is the big Basilica of St. Anthony, for lost causes, and they have an incredible reliquary. A reliquary is an ornate case that sacred, very, very sacred things can be placed in and there for all to see. And I just even hesitate to tell you some of the things they had in this reliquary, but it was amazing. They had St. Anthony was known as an incredible preacher. He was a peer of St. Francis of Assisi. They were alive at the same time. He was known as an incredible preacher. Well, what do they have in the reliquary? His larynx. Yeah. I mean, so, I just roll with it. I mean, that's the only thing you can do, right? So somehow saints, I had all of these saints, I've just had such a pleasure in getting to know them. I feel like they're kind of like my friends now. And so I'll give you a short excerpt on somebody you may or may not have heard of. This is St. Catherine Drexel. Okay. And now here I was, happily standing in one of the great railway stations in this country, D.C.'s Union Station. Its architecture is so frescoed, so grand, it's a thrilling start to my train travels. There'd be 2.5 hours to look out the window at the things seldom seen from freeways. The backsides of wrecking yards and old factories. So many interesting polluted canals. And in Philadelphia, my aim was to learn more about Catherine Drexel, the fabulous society heiress who became a saint. Very few inspiring people had the array of life choices Catherine Drexel did. At the age of 25, she and her 2 sisters inherited $14 million, quite a fortune in 1883. Wow. There are photos of her as a little girl wearing a coat edged in ermine, photos of her in a summer dress with her horse Roland driving the lanes in their near their summer house. Her father and uncle had made their money in finance during the gold rush and the Civil War. What was expected of Catherine was to make a brilliant marriage match and take her place among her peers, but what she did do was cast her eyes upon the most mistreated and forgotten segments of society, African Americans and Native Americans. These were the others whom white people didn't want to interact with, and for this some call her the Mother Teresa of America. In her era, from 1880 through to the 1940s, Catherine had the chutzpah and personality to attract hundreds of women to join her as she off-roaded across America, starting schools, prayer centers, and clinics, and pioneering the advancement of racial equality and education. Catherine had a plan. After her training, she started her own order, the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament. In that way, she could control her own money. And from the start, her sisters were troublemakers. Churches and schools with even the most remote connection to the Sisters of the Blessed Sacrament were blocked, targeted, or destroyed before they could open. Catherine was undeterred. Macon, Georgia passed a law to stop SBS sisters and run them out of town, but she fought that law and won. When people found out that Xavier University in Louisiana, which she started, was to be for black students, they smashed out every window. Catherine and her sisters crisscrossed this country by train, boat, stagecoach, and car to bring betterment to those whom few others would aid. And her motto was, attract them with joy. And she'd quote Jeremiah 29:7 to her sisters. Seek the welfare of the city, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. Yes, yes, and yes. We could all use a friend like Catherine. She paid for everything. The construction of the schools, the salaries for the teachers, the saddles for the horses, the room and tuition for boarders, the wine for the altars. But in 1924 alone, Catherine paid $24,000 in taxes. This irritated her so much that she lobbied Congress and won. Nicknamed the Philadelphia Nun Tax Loophole Bill, the law stated that if 90% of one's income is given to charity, it shall not be taxed. This was repealed in the 1970s because, as you can imagine, corporations figured out how to take merciless advantage of this. Okay. And so that's the way this one starts. But it takes the reader lots of different places. So Catherine, she was an avid reader, and as a young child, she loved Charles Dickens. And all of the heartache in Charles Dickens, the poverty and like the orphans and the things like that, it really turned her heart towards that. But her father and her mother were very well educated, and they would sit at their dining room table at night and they would talk about the ills of the day. And they were big philanthropists. And so when she was about 16, her father took the family out west on, it was business for him, but pleasure for them. But this is probably, it was before Wounded Knee, because she became friends with, I'm drawing a blank of Chief Sitting Bull, I guess. And they went out to the Western Territories, and they traveled, and the amount of poverty, I mean, many of the reservations are still very, very impoverished, but what they were like in, 1890s was apparently just horrifying to them. And so she thought that would be her mission, to help start lifting that, and that's how it started. But she was threatened by the Ku Klux Klan said they were going to tar and feather her and all kinds of stuff, and she just would have none of it. She was very, very formidable. Pictures of her almost scare you, but she was amazing. Yeah. Yeah. Anybody have any thoughts or comments about this? Yes.
So are all the people that you describe in your book saints? Or are they saints?
No. In this book, everybody's a bona fide saint. Mm-hmm. In this one, I've broadened the base, and there are full-on saints. There are blesseds, and there are venerables. So there's 6 steps to official Catholic sainthood.
I couldn't remember. Thank you.
But there are also people like my hair cutter at Supercuts is in here, and my friend Michael's mother is in here, and people that I found interesting. So, the first step to being a saint is that you have to die. So we're not in that club yet, none of us. So, often people will say, "Well, do I have a favorite saint?" And honestly, my favorite was the one I was working on at the time, because I just was always fell in love with their mission, what they wanted to do on earth, who they were personality-wise. Honestly, one of my favorites was St. Frances Cabrini, and she is in, I guess which book is she in? Anyway, she was Italian, and she immigrated to this country in 1890, which was part of the great Italian migration to this country coming through New York. And the Italians were very much not wanted in this country. And she came, she petitioned to come here to minister to the Italians in the Lower East Side, which was considered the densest, most heavily populated place on earth in that time. 1 million Italians came in, and it's really incredible how poor off they had it. She came, she didn't speak English, she had the equivalent of $45 with her, The Bishop of New York said she could come, but when she got here, he said, actually, go home. We don't need you. We don't want you. And she said, nope, I'm not going home. So somebody put her up. She and her two sisters are down on the Lower East Side. And if any of you know much about the Lower East Side in those years, it was hard. And that she stayed in the U.S. for 27 years until she died. So that's where she started. In the course of 27 years, she founded 27 different foundations in this country, everywhere from New York to Los Angeles. Hospitals, schools, orphanages, mostly orphanages. And it turns out what she discovered about herself in this new land, America, is that she was a wizard with money. She did not know that about herself. She was already 40 years old at that time, but she had a knack, and she could just get money everywhere. And so I really tried to imagine what her personality must have been like. She was very tiny, didn't speak English, learned English, obviously, but who she must have been. And there are stories when she was building the first TB sanatorium in Los Angeles. This was in 1906. On the property that is now the Music Center for Los Angeles, because she got some wealthy people to give her their mansion, but it needed to be bigger. So there are accounts of people seeing Mother Cabrini with a horse and buggy going around Los Angeles scavenging defunct amusement parks to get building materials for her sanatorium. So she's like this little personal hero of mine. And whenever I've gone out like yard sailing, I'm thinking, Mother Cabrini, take me to the good stuff here, because that's how I feel about her. Also because she, and this was an era where it was quite difficult for a woman to buy and sell tracts of land, to hire contractors to build buildings, and she built buildings in Philadelphia, in Boston, in Chicago, Seattle, Los Angeles, Louisiana, and she traveled back to Italy by boat almost every year to bring back more sisters
more nuns, yes.
And yeah.
Wow.
So
she started with 3, right?
She started with 3. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do any of you have a special affinity to a particular saint, or has it come down in your family, like anything? Yes.
Excuse me. Claire of Assisi.
Oh, yes. I have never been to Assisi, so I haven't been able to write about her yet.
You have a place to go.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
Mary Lea, the story of Bakita is interesting. Can you just share a little of that? The woman on the post.
So she was only made a saint in 2012, and I talk about it in the book. I went to the convent that she spent the last 30 years of her life in, which is in northern Italy, and I talked to the nuns, and they very generously opened the church, because it was closed when I went. I just went. I didn't call anybody or anything. And they have her body there. And I said, oh wait. I said, but I thought Pope John Paul II had taken her body back to the Sudan, which is where she's from. And the little Italian sister, she says, oh no, he just took her arm. We have her body. So I felt really honored that I could.
Why did he do that?
Because he did that, and it was quite incredible. So her story is beyond belief, as many of them are. This is Saint Bakita, Josephine Bakita. She was born in the Sudan about 1869-ish. They don't know for sure. And when she was 9, she was kidnapped and sold into slavery, and as was apparently quite common. And she spent the years from 9 until about 20 in the different households of what they call them the Arabs. But then, as was the case, now we're talking the years 1900, 1906, right around the opening of the Suez Canal.
Mm-hmm.
It was very common for Italian businessmen to do business in this part of Africa, mostly the rubber trade. And it was also very common for Italians to pay ransom for people who were servants and slaves and bring them back to Italy. And then they would have, house help for life. And so it was kind of messed up every which way. Anyway, she ended up in a very good household with an Italian. And the now Civil War was breaking out. And so he was going to decamp and go back to Italy. And she begged him to take her with him. And obviously she had a compelling personality, and he did. And he brought her back to Italy and gave her to the wife of a business associate, so that as an impressive gift. And she became the nanny of this family's little girl. Well, they had to go and help open up the Suez Canal. So they left her, Bakita, and the little 5-year-old in the care of the convent in Venice. And they didn't come back for 2 years. So Bakita, who had no knowledge of Western life or Christianity or anything, is now in the care of the nuns. And it's very moving because it was the first time she ever had the concept that she possibly could be a lovable person. And was worthy of love. And she converted to Christianity and then really thought, I never want to leave her. Well, the family comes back to pick up their property to go on, and now she has the wherewithal to say, I'm staying here. Well, this was on her, because she was actually property, and Italy was very late in lifting slavery laws, but they had been lifted like a year before or something like that. It's all these saints have taken me many places. Anyway, it became practically international news, her case, and she was able to win it. She was able to have her own agency. She could do what she wanted. She didn't have to go back with the family. And at that point, she became a sister. And what's wonderful about her gift, every one of the people in these books have gifts, particular gifts. And honestly, you read about Catherine Drexel or Frances Cabrini, and you think, I'm not going to start a hospital. I'm just not, I just know me. I'm not starting a hospital. And then you think, well, obviously she's a saint, so she could do it. But with Bakita, her gift was her presence. Like, people never forgot her after they met her. She had a tone in her voice, and she had a spirit about her. And I know this or glean this because they say that when they were working on her cause for canonization, she died in 1948. They had to interview anybody who possibly could have known her. And this was in the 80s. They were doing these interviews. So where she lived, where I visited, had been, still was, a school. And she was the cook in the school for 20 years. And they interviewed people who were in their high 80s, who had been students at the school when she was the cook. They could remember every single thing she ever said to them, because she'd sit and tell them stories, or she'd give them advice, or she was the doorkeeper, and so she would greet people. And they knew every single word that she said to them. They could recount like verbatim, because she could make that kind of an impression on people. But what I find so cool about that is, like, all of us have a capacity to do like something like that. Be kind enough, to leave an impression. And none of us probably can start a hospital. But what I just that kind of stuff really inspires me. So that's her. And as I say, very few people know of her. There's a lot of saints that are obscure, but she's a modern saint, and actually her name, people are starting to name their kids after her and all kinds of stuff. So yeah.
Well, we had the question, was she officially canonized back through Rome and all that?
Saint Bakita, yes.
Okay.
Yes. She has her. A lot of things are a little bit tongue in cheek, but I don't mean them in any disrespectful way. But yes, she has her own holy card and her own feast day. So.
Well, if everybody could give Mary Lea a really big round of applause.